Hey everybody, my name is Dan, like Amanda said, and I am so excited that you guys are here with us today as we have week 2 of our series, Through the Fire. But I want to reference something real quick that you just saw, and that's the State of the Church address that's going to be happening immediately following this service. We'll have 5 minutes, there'll be a little timer, enough time for you to go out, refill your coffee. I would encourage you, stick around. If you've got kids, you can leave them in kids' church over there, and eKids, there's extended childcare over there. But I want you to come back and hear some of the exciting things that have happened over this past year, but also some really exciting things that are happening in 2018. One of those things is something that I got to participate in this past week. If you weren't here last week, how many of you were here last week for week 1 of Through the Fire? Benji did an incredible job. You guys here for that? Yeah, it was awesome. When Benji spoke, I think we should have changed it to just Bring the Fire with Benji Block. That'd be a more adequate name for that. But it was awesome. The reason he was speaking is I was actually gone last week with some friends in Monclova, Mexico, and I cannot wait to tell you all some of the things that happened, some of the things that we have planned, that we're wanting to do, and if you come to State of the Church, you'll get to hear about some of those things, as well as other things. So I'll just leave that as a teaser, and hope you guys come back 5 minutes after service and hear about that. But what I was so encouraged by when I was gone is how well Eikon just goes on without me, which can be a little depressing too, because sometimes it gets better when I'm gone, and I'm like, wait a minute. But last week, it was awesome. It was incredible. Anytime I'm gone, I know that it's in safe hands. I don't think everyone quite realizes the leadership and the incredible people we have that serve here every single week on our serve teams, the staff that helps lead this church, the boards that we have. We have an incredible leadership team, and specifically some really gifted communicators on our team. And that doesn't happen at a whole lot of churches. You have multiple people like that. And I was just so encouraged that I could be gone and know that Benji's killing it. He's taking care of things here as he speaks. And one of the things I love to do is I love to go back when I miss a Sunday is go back and watch it. I wish we could watch it live. When I was in Mexico, I was like, if I could watch this live right now from Mexico, it'd be awesome. But I was like, I'll watch it after the fact. So I was at a coffee shop this past week, actually getting ready for this message, and I was like, I want to watch Benji's message, and maybe there's some notes I can jot down to help follow up. And I watched it, and it was this incredible message. If you missed it, I want to encourage you to jump on there. And I saw something in particular that kind of stood out to me as I was watching it, and I was like, interesting. And there was this part that Benji was talking about the climate around us, that we all kind of have a personal climate, and our attitude affects that climate that we're in, and the importance of having the right kind of attitude when we're going through difficult times. And it was so good, and he talked about how sometimes, like at work, you don't have people around you to encourage you and challenge you. And there's one thing he said, I don't think I could do it as justice, so I want us to hear it from Benji. So let's go watch and see exactly what Benji said.
Pastor Dan's not coming into your work. Well, actually, you shouldn't be that way because in the Bible it says. I don't know why that's my voice for Pastor Dan. He's not here, so we'll cut that in the podcast. Okay.
Oh, that's cool. I'm not there, huh? Yeah, no, that's cool, man. That's cool. I love Benji. And it's because of that it's great sadness that I announce this is the last Sunday. So Benji's fired, and you can pack your office up and get out of here. So anyway, as I was watching, I was so encouraged, except for that part. I was bitter. But anyway, I was watching, and there was one thing that Benji said to really set up this whole series. And I thought, man, this is such a great question, and I want to take it a little bit further. So I want us to go back to Benji's question. And he asked this: what do you do when God doesn't show up like you thought he would? What do you do? What do you do in your life when God doesn't show up how you thought he would? Or let's even take this a step further. What do you do when God doesn't show up when you think you think he should? In moments, it's not just like, I expected God to do this, but it was something different. But no, God, you have to do this. God, you should show up in this. And he doesn't. What do you do then? You see, he kind of told this story out of the Bible, story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And there was these 3 Hebrew children that were taken into slavery, taken into oppression. They were living in Babylon, and they were commanded to do certain things. And there came to this point where they finally stood up and they just said no. Like, we're not going to have it. They were wanting them to bow down to this idol. And these 3 children, these 3 teenagers stood up and said, no, we're not going to have it. We're not going to bow down. At risk of death, the king said, I'm going to throw you into a furnace, I'm going to burn you alive, and they said no. And what's so encouraging, I love the moxie, the guts of these guys. Listen to what they said to the king. They said, if we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. They go on, he says, but even if he doesn't, it's amazing. We want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up. Isn't that the courage of those guys? They say, listen, God is able to save us. He will save us. But even if he doesn't, we won't bow down. The king is just furious. And he takes him, he has him thrown into the furnace. The furnace is so hot, the guy throwing him in is burned. And they go in, the king looks, and they're alive. Not even their clothes are singed by the fire. In fact, looking in, he sees a fourth person in there with him. He sees a fourth man. This is the Lord. This is Jesus. The theology, you call this a Christophany, this appearance in the Old Testament of Christ in the fire with them, that God is in the fire of our lives with us. Isn't that amazing, this great story? But here's the thing that I've experienced in my life, and I would bet you've probably experienced in your life too. There's just one problem with that. Because sometimes it doesn't happen that way, does it? I mean, what happens when God doesn't show up? What happens when you're thrown into the furnace and you think, oh, I know what God can do. I know what God's going to do. He's going to rescue me. And he doesn't. What happens when you're blindsided by your spouse with that conversation and they say that they're leaving you and you know God's going to come through and they just leave you? When your boss announces that they're downsizing and you're saying, no, not my job, I'm gonna get to keep mine, and you lose your job. What happens when your child breaks your heart and runs the other direction? What then? What about when you're holding on for a prayer for healing? The person dies. I mean, God forbid, as we've heard this past week, the tragedy in Parkland. What do you say to those parents that were holding on to hope that it wasn't their child? It wasn't their son, it wasn't their daughter, and they're holding on to hope, only to find out it was. What do you say then? What do you say to parents like that are grieving like that? And can I just kind of make a side statement for a moment? To the Christians in our community, in our world sometimes, that when they hear something like that, post something or say something along the lines of like, well, that's what happens when you take God out of school. What do you expect? Can I just say that's incredibly unhelpful, and that's the lightest words I could use in this moment? First of all, by having administration not lead a prayer, you're not taking God out of a school. God is omnipotent. He's everywhere. He's omnipresent. So if you say, oh, we're taking God out of schools, no, you're not. And you can hope, and kids can still pray in schools. But furthermore, if you worship a God that says, oh, because you took prayer out of schools, well, then I'm just going to let 17 kids get murdered, you serve a pretty weak God. And there's a problem with that. So if you said that, I'm sorry. Well, not really. But listen, we've got to think through what we're saying to each other. We got to realize that there are people going through real tragedy, that their lives in their mind are over. And they're saying, what about this? What about me when God doesn't show up in my fire? That's great for you. But what about me? I was talking to friends recently, and they're relaying a tragic story that they experienced in their life, and there was one thing that was said that stood out to me. They said the last thing that leaves you is always hope. Because you cling on to that hope for as long as you can, don't you? That your spouse might not leave. That maybe they got it wrong. That they're calling about the wrong kid. That your job, no, you got a little bit of hope. Maybe the business won't fall apart. And you hold on to that hope as long as you can, but sometimes even that hope is extinguished, isn't it? Because I got to be honest, in my life, there's been times that I've experienced that. And I would venture to guess that you've probably been through scenarios and situations with loved ones and family and friends where they went through that. So I'm going to title the talk today something that at first glance might seem a little sacrilegious, and I just want you to follow me for a moment. Today we're going to be talking about when God is wrong. Because come on. If you've followed Jesus for any amount of time and gone through tragedy and had life happen, there's been moments in your life that you've thought, God, you're wrong on this one. And maybe it's just me, because I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be transparent here. There's been times that I've looked at God and said, God, you're wrong on this one. You can't do this. It can't happen this way, God. That you're praying, that you're holding on to hope, and all of a sudden, all those hopes are dashed. There's been times I've looked at God and said things like, God, if you treat your friends this way, I'd hate to see how you treat your enemies. And listen, if you're sitting there going, I hope lightning doesn't strike Dan. You're like scooting your seat away a little bit. You're like, I don't know about this. Listen, there's good company because in the Bible, there's lots of people that have said that same thing. People, God, why have you rejected me? Why are you leaving me? Jesus said, why have you forsaken me, oh God? This is real life. And when we sit here and we talk like everything's always roses for Christians and everything always works out, we have to acknowledge that sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you're left holding the pieces, feeling and saying things like, I'll never be happy again. We can't get past this one. Or you believe things like, God has left me. God, where are you now? You tell yourself, there's just no point in continuing. My life, as I've known it, is over. So what's the point? And when there's been moments like that in my life, when I've thought these things, when I've felt these things, the questions lying underneath this is, God, do you even care? God, do you know? Are you apathetic? Where are you? In moments like this, I don't know where to go, and I don't understand. I look to the Bible and I see if in someone's felt lived experience, as they interacted with God, has somebody else gone through this? And what did they do? How did they look at Jesus in moments like this? And I'm encouraged to find out that there are people that have experienced this. Like I said earlier, the Bible's full of people like this. One of them that we're going to talk about today is a guy by the name of John the Baptist. John the Baptist is actually related to Jesus. We don't know exactly how, but they're kind of cousins of sorts. They're family. Not only that, but they're really close. In fact, so close that John the Baptist actually baptizes Jesus. That looked pretty good on a resume, right? What'd you do with your life? I don't know. Baptize the Messiah? How's that? That's just for starters, we'll start there. And not only that, not only is John the Baptist the guy that baptizes Jesus, at that moment, what Jesus says about John the Baptist is he says, there has been no man greater than John the Baptist that has been born by women. That's a pretty glowing endorsement, right? You're going in for a job interview, right? And they're like, we need to look at your references. Okay, how about Christ? You go there first, because here's what he said. Jesus and John, they're close. They're family. They're blood. Jesus is looking at the ministry that John the Baptist is doing and is saying, this is great. This is ushering in an opportunity for me to speak truth, bring the gospel here. So here's the thing. I realize that not all of you, most of you, but not all of you are, experts in the ancient Near East and like Palestine, Israel. So I got a map for you. So all of you already know this, but the few that don't, we've got a map up here. We're going to put it up here. This is the ancient Near East around the time of Jesus and John the Baptist, what's going on. We've got it up on the big screen, so hopefully you can see it a little bit better. But John the Baptist is doing his ministry along this river, the Jordan River, between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea there at the bottom. So John's doing his ministry around there, and things are going well. But the only problem is there are some people that didn't exactly like everything that John was saying and John was doing. See, because John had this habit of being really bold and speaking truth to power. And the ruler at that time in that area was a guy by the name of Herod. They called him Herod. And this one Herod, he, pretty messed up, I know. He claimed his niece to be his wife, right? Which is pretty creepy. Like, in America, they don't even do that in Tennessee, you know? So it's real, like, really weird, right? So he has this niece-wife thing, and then it gets worse because he goes up to Rome for a while. So another uncle comes and claims that niece is his wife, and this is just happening out in the open. And John's like, that's messed up. That's keeping up with the Herods sort of thing. It's just really there's some messed up stuff going on, and you think your family reunions are awkward? Imagine that, right? You're walking in, you're like, this is awkward, right? And John speaks out against it. And everyone's like, don't ixnay on the Herod. This can get you into big trouble. And John just won't shut up. He keeps calling it out and saying, that's evil, that's wrong. So Herod does what Herods do, and they lock him up and throw him into prison. So I want to show you where this prison is. He's thrown into prison in a place called Machaerus. Now, if you'll notice, this is the furthest southeast in the entire region, and the entire kind of kingdom at the time. This is, in fact, down here, this is nothing but desert down here, and he's thrown into a desert prison in Machaerus. In fact, you can go to it and see it to this day. It's like this mountaintop that's kind of leveled off in the middle of the desert. You turn around, it's just nothing but desert for miles, is this prison, this kind of up on this mountain called in Machaerus. And that's where John is held. And there's no due process. There's no appealing the process or anything. He's just thrown in, and he's going to die there unless something happens. In fact, it's so bad that he has to have his disciples come and bring him food to stay alive. That if he's left there, they'll just let him starve to death. So he's having his disciples bring him food. He's in the middle of nowhere. Jesus is doing ministry, and John's like, hey, what about Jesus? And you got to wonder, what does Jesus think about this? His friend, his relative, his family is locked up in prison. So what does Jesus do? So, we can find out. In Matthew 4, it says, when Jesus heard that John had been put into prison, right? And you're like, oh man, Jesus is going to throw down, right? When his friend is locked up for speaking truth, it's going to be on. So here's Jesus. Here's where Jesus is. You got to look at the map. Jesus is up here in Nazareth. Okay, that's where he's doing his ministry at the time. And then John is down here in Machaerus. So we read, when Jesus hears, Jesus is up in Nazareth. And when Jesus hears, what do you expect? All of us. You know what I would expect to happen? Jesus is coming down and he's kicking tail. He is going to come down Rambo style, knife in the mouth, guns. They didn't have guns, but whatever, spears. And Jesus is going to come. At least he's going to flip a few tables over, right? That's how he do. You just expect Jesus to come down, flip some tables and get a whip and chase people around. Jesus, come and save me, right? That's what he's supposed to do. They're friends. He said there's no one greater than John. John baptized him. So we go back and we read, when Jesus heard that John had been put into prison, he withdrew to Galilee. Leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum. Let's go back to the map. So Jesus, he's here in Nazareth, right? John, he's down here in Machaerus. He's locked up, and he's thinking, I'm going to die here if something doesn't happen. What does Jesus do? Jesus goes to Capernaum. Jesus, that's the wrong way. That's the opposite direction. Not only that, but again, if you saw pictures of these places, Machaerus, again, imagine Sahara Desert. Capernaum is on the coast of the Sea of Galilee. Picture lush, green, tropical palm trees everywhere. You imagine this. If you see this, it's John's down here sweating it out, dying in Machaerus, and Jesus is sipping Mai Tais in Capernaum. What are you doing? Jesus, what's your problem? I'm dying down here, and you're going to the beach? Imagine being John in this moment. You'd have a problem with that, wouldn't you? Jesus just heard that he was in prison. That verse, it was one after another. After Jesus heard John was in prison, here we go. He goes to Capernaum. What? Well, why? And John's down here, and he's thinking that. He's there for over a year, probably a year and a half he's in prison. He's going, Jesus, where are you? And he starts to doubt and he starts to wonder, is he really who I thought he was? Is Jesus really the one? And he begins to ask, he asks his disciples to ask him, are you the one that is to come? Are you the chosen one? He gets his disciples and he says, I want you to go to Capernaum. I want you to ask Jesus if he's really the one that is to come, the Messiah, the Savior. John, he's doubting. He's like us when we've wondered, God, where are you? God, I thought you loved me. What's the problem? Why aren't you delivering me? And his disciples go to Jesus. They go to Capernaum and they ask him these questions, and Jesus replies. He says, go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight. The lame walk. Those who have had leprosy are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. And the good news is proclaimed to the poor. The disciples are like, come again? You want us to tell John what? Jesus is like, yeah, you heard it here. Another place, Jesus is talking about his ministry. He's like, the blind receive their sight. The captives are set free. John's disciples are like, we're going to leave that part out. Little too soon for John, right? And they're like, hold on. You want us to tell John what we've seen? You want us to tell him what? So the message you want us to bring back to John, who's doubting if you're the one, is to tell him about all the miracles you're doing for everybody else but him. We've been there, haven't we? Or we're walking through hell and people come alongside us and they're like, oh, it's okay. You know what? I've been there. I know. You know what God did for me? And you're like, shut up. Like, I never asked you what you thought. I didn't ask you what you went through. And well-meaning people sometimes make it worse, don't they? They're Christian cliches and all. They're, oh, have hope, brother. And you're like, no, I lost it all. So what now? What, Jesus did a miracle for you? Good for you. Where's my miracle? Because that last little bit of hope that I was clinging to just fell apart. And the message Jesus has for John is look at what he's done for everybody else. What do you do with that? What do you do with that when you're walking through such a difficult time and you see how God provided in other circumstances and he doesn't do it for you? So in moments like this, I want you to know something. If you're walking through this right now, I want to tell you something. Something that you may not feel, and that's okay. I want to tell you that in these moments, he still loves you. He still knows your name. And he knows your situation. And he still wants to be active in your life. And you know what I don't have? Much more than that. I don't know. I can't explain it. I'm not coming to you with all these answers other than to say, I get it. Yeah, I've been there. John, he was there. And sometimes we pray and we feel like we're just talking to the walls. It feels like the heavens are brass and we can't get through. And God is just silent. And all you want is something, anything. God, give me anything. You hear nothing but silence. And you begin to tell yourself things. You begin to believe that God doesn't care. You begin to believe that maybe he's angry. That God's ticked off that you did something wrong. It's because, and again, please, if you're a follower of Jesus, if you're not, never say this. Maybe you believe it's because you didn't have enough faith or some sin in your life and that's why God's doing this to you. That's not true. It's not true. But we begin to believe that he's angry, he's apathetic, he doesn't care. I want to encourage you and I want to challenge you. Do not equate God's silence for his absence, his apathy, or his anger. He's not angry. He cares. Somehow, somewhere, he's in the midst of it. And I don't get it either. And he knew this would be the case for John. Jesus knew that this would be difficult for him. And he wants him to keep his faith. He doesn't want him to lose faith that Jesus is the one. And after he tells that to the disciples, he's like, but I get it. I know how this sounds. And right after that, he says, blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. Blessed is John if he doesn't stumble on account of this situation. When you've lost it all, when your spouse has walked out, when your kids are making poor choices, when you lose your job, when it feels like everything falls apart, when the healing doesn't come, when the person dies, don't stumble on account of that. I get it. It sucks. It's hard. I don't have any clean answers for you. But I want to tell you something that doesn't feel true right now. But I want to challenge you. I want you to know you will be happy again. You will. You will be happy again. I want you to know that God is in the midst of this. And I want you to know that there is a point in continuing. I know it doesn't feel that way. I know it feels hopeless and it feels pointless, but God is in the midst of it. I know it feels like you'll never be happy again, that you'll never recover from this. You will be happy again. God's in it. There's a point to continuing. Just keep going. So I know that's hard. I know it's hard to believe this at times, but it's true. We need to understand that. Because here's the thing, I heard this story recently, and it really stood out to me and made this evident for me. See, back in the pioneer days when they were going out west, there was a family who'd settled right on the frontier, right on the kind of edge of where civilization was. And they'd built up this little kind of farm for themselves, and they had a meager existence, but it was enough to get by. This family was kind of a farming family, and they had these wheat fields. Only one summer, there was a fire that started in one of their wheat fields and burned out this whole area in their field. After they had put the fire out, they wondered, how are we going to make it? We're not going to have enough food. We're not going to survive through the winter. And they were left saying, God, what now? We've lost a portion of our field. We don't have extra. We can't make it through this. They just decided to do their best and try to make it through. Only to a month later, a wildfire is blowing across the prairie right towards them. The winds have whipped it up and it's blowing so quickly towards them that there is no physical way that they're going to get away. The horses, the animals aren't going to be able to get away. They realize that they're about to die. The fire rushes towards them. They realize they only have one hope. And they run to that burnt patch of ground. They fall face down in the charred earth as the fire burns around them. It's then that they realize that the place that was once a place of destruction and devastation ended up being a space of deliverance. I don't get it. I don't understand why it works that way sometimes. I can't say that that's exactly the case for you and what you're going through. I don't know. But what I do know, and what I love more than anything, is I love the Jesus that we encounter when he comes into our problems and our troubles and our difficult times. See, Jesus, there was another instance where something like this had happened. Another family that was close to Jesus, their brother was sick and was dying. And they sent word to Jesus and they said, Jesus, come quickly. Pray for him. Heal him. And again, Jesus hears that he's dying. And instead, Jesus goes out and he does more ministry. And the guy dies. Jesus comes and he gets there and they're like, Lord, you're too late. This was preventable. You were out healing everybody else and you let our brother die. Jesus comes and it says that when he saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? He said, Lord, come and see. And then simplest, shortest verse in the whole Bible, but possibly one of the most powerful. We read that Jesus wept. As he saw them in their grief and their trouble, we worship a Lord that weeps with us. That when we're in the muck and the mire and the devastation and we've lost all hope, we serve a God that's down there with us, that's weeping alongside us. That when we cry out and we say, God, where are you now? Jesus is weeping right there with you. That's who we serve. What I don't have for you is all the answers and the explanations and, oh, this is why this happens and, this is how this is going to work out for the good. Here, I don't know. I don't come with answers. I just want you to know you're not alone. I've been there. Other people in this room, they've been there. John the Baptist, he was there. This family, they were there. And I think here at church, if all we were to say is to talk about the moments that God came through in the 11th hour and the 59th minute, we'd be doing you a disservice because we know we live in a real world where sometimes that doesn't happen. And sometimes the king throws us into the fire and we just die. And I don't understand why. But what I know is that God's not apathetic. God's not angry with you. He loves you. And if you're in a time of your life where you're weeping and you're mourning, He's right there with you. You will be happy again. God is with you. And there is a point to continuing on. And maybe, just maybe, that burnt patch of ground might be your deliverance someday. So here's how we're going to end. In a moment, the band is going to play a couple of songs. The first song, a song that they wrote that talks about the moments that we doubt and we wonder. And in those very moments that He's right there beside us, calling us home. Myself and some of the prayer team is going to be on either side of the stage here. And if you need someone to pray with, and if you need someone to talk with, we're going to make these next few moments a time that we can pray and process this. And if you come from a tradition, from a background that you want to come down here to the altar and pray down here, I want you to know that that's open to you. If you want to stand and sing, if you want to sit at your chair and kneel and turn around and turn your chair into a type of altar, that's fine too. Whatever you need to do to process this, it's okay. And if you're in a place right now where you're thinking, man, it's kind of heavy. I'm good. Life's all right now. Just pack this away. Someday life's going to happen to you too, or to a friend or to a family or loved one, and you'll need to remember this for them. So as I pray, the band leads in the song, would you, if you want to, pray with us, stand and sing. Just make this a place of prayer for those that really do want to process through this. Let's pray. God, we thank you